After the amazing saga that was Water 7, how does One Piece step it up from here? What is next? What's after Water 7? If you have not watched my review on Water 7, go and watch it somewhere on screen or just go to my channel and watch it. This is my review on the saga after Water 7, that being Thriller Bark. Now I'm gonna be 100% honest with you guys. I feel a lot of ways about this saga. Some good, some bad, and some are just thoughts. Some aren't even good or bad, they're just kind of thoughts that I have about this part of the show. And I feel like that is kind of a good way to sum up this saga. It's kind of good, it's kind of bad, and it's kind of meh. Like, it's kind of just there. So let's break down the 5th One Piece saga, that being Thriller Bark. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It means the world to me. Let's talk about it. Now, this is your first video you're watching of mine. I am a new One Piece watcher. I'm watching through all of One Piece for the first time, and I'm reviewing each saga with you guys while I'm watching it. So I do have a playlist of all my other One Piece reviews if you guys want to watch those. Now, first thing to note here, this is the first saga in One Piece to be entirely built off of one single arc. So far, each saga has had multiple arcs. Skypiea only had 2 arcs, but those are still pretty beefy arcs to have. And so off rip, that's interesting to say the least, because most stories give different arcs to kind of separate sections of the show or separate sections of the story. But Thriller Bark only having 1 did kind of worry me a little bit, and that's just because Skypiea only had 2, and it did a really poor job of separating the content and kind of overwhelmed me and just kept dropping stuff and just honestly never ending. And I felt like the pacing in Skypiea wasn't that good, so that was my issue with that, is I felt like there wasn't enough separation in what was happening to where I felt like I was kind of being eased in and eased through the story. So I was worried that that was going to happen here, and I think my worries were at least a little bit justified. And before I start talking about the saga itself, I gotta be honest, I never really heard anyone mention Thriller Bark that much. I heard people talking up things like Marineford and Water 7 and that sort of thing, and people shitting on Skypiea and openly saying it was a bad section of the show. So I've heard good and I've heard bad about certain sections, but I never really heard anything about Thriller Bark. So I honestly kind of went in with almost no expectations on what I was going to see, really. Now, when we left the last arc, Ennis Lobby, or the post Ennis Lobby arc, the emotions were really high for the crew and for me as well as the watcher. We had arguably one of the biggest team development sagas in the entire show. We got a new ship, we got a new crewmate being Frankie. So I kind of feel like no matter what happened, Thriller Bark was always going to be fighting an uphill battle with trying to tackle and lead off of Water 7, which is unfortunate because every show and every story needs to have some dips, and needs to have ups and downs just to keep the flow going. So let's dive into the story of Thriller Bark. So I do like that we get some time on the new ship. We get an introduction to kind of new parts of the ship and new abilities that the ship might have, which is really dope. I love to see Frankie kind of innovating in the actual boat itself and kind of making these changes that might hopefully help us out in the future and maybe lead to bigger things happening within the ship itself. And off rip, I gotta just say it, I'm a whore for spooky vibes, and Thriller Bark is pretty much the saga of spooky vibes. So I was super excited when we're going through the water and it's all kind of haunted and ghosty and that sort of thing. I was just really excited. And then the crew eventually finds an abandoned ghost ship, and they end up finding obviously what ends up being Brook on this abandoned ship just kind of floating in the water. And I will say Brook is actually really cool. I like Brook a lot, and I honestly think the episodes introducing him here were some of the funniest and also most heartfelt episodes that we've had for a character introduction, other than like Chopper or Frankie. They had really good introductions, I think. And he also kind of leads us toward the next big bad, someone that can steal shadows, and we kind of get a hint at what we might be expecting for the rest of this saga. And I think this idea of stealing shadows is really cool, and it does kind of continue the spooky vibe that's being set up already. And then eventually our crew and the Thousand Sunny get kind of trapped by the Thriller Bark Island and are forced to basically explore the island and find a way off. Now, up to this point, I was really excited about this saga. I had actually really liked everything I'd seen so far. I loved the introduction of Brook. I loved the vibes that we were getting with, you know, the ghosty ship and all this stuff. I really liked that. And I also really did like seeing Robin and Frankie with the whole team together, because again, in Water 7, they're kind of split up a good amount, so seeing everyone together is also just really fun. But this, honestly, when they get off the ship and start kind of exploring, is when the show really started to drag for me a little bit. I think I just learned from this show that the crew is going to split up no matter what, and I just tend to really not like portions of the show that does that, just because in my head it's like, it just doesn't even make sense for the group to split up. Like, it's just, I don't know, I just don't like it when they do that. I like the crew together. I like them being together. I know it's easier maybe for storytelling and for character development to have everyone kind of split off, but I personally prefer them to stick together. I will say it does feel kind of weird here and out of character for Luffy just to run off into the island and explore and like look for Brook and all these things. Like, I get it, he's excited and he's hyped for Brook to maybe join the team and all this stuff, right? But it just seems out of character. We had this huge saga about the team being a team and the team being there for each other and what it means to be a crew and all these things. And then at the first moment Luffy gets where the whole crew is trapped and potentially in danger, he just runs away. Like, I don't want to say it's bad writing, because I don't think it's necessarily bad writing. It just seems out of character for Luffy to do that after all that just happened in Water 7, personally. And when they start exploring and kind of figuring some stuff out in the island, I think it is really cool with Chopper, especially because he does kind of get a little bit more shine being the doctor and kind of medical person of the team, because he's also the only person that knows who Dr. Hogback is, and that's just really cool that he kind of has some information that no one else really does yet so far in the team. And I feel like this Dr. Hogback character should be really important, and honestly I feel like should come back later on in the series, because for Chopper to know who Dr. Hogback is and to basically suck him off because he's just such an amazing famous doctor, right, is pretty crazy, especially when you consider that Chopper was an animal for a long portion of his life and just recently started becoming a doctor, and then also had never really left the island. So he was pretty much just getting all his information from one secluded place from very secluded sources, you know? So for him to know about this doctor, I feel like this doctor has to have certain feats or certain things that would potentially come back later on in the show. And shocker, we end up finding out that this super famous doctor is actually not a great guy and is doing all these crazy experiments on dead people and bringing bodies together and just doing a lot of weird, maybe not super morally correct things. And I will say I do like the doctor being like this weird kind of outcast from the medical society. Really interesting, because the whole idea is that he's on Thriller Bark hiding from the government to do his experiments in hiding. I like that. I'm a fan of drama, I'm a fan of horror, so I do like him kind of having his own little storyline on the side. Is pretty cool. And also Usopp, Nami, and Chopper being together, I honestly wasn't super excited for, but they're all really funny. I love these three characters together. They just end up having some of the funniest moments here, the three of them, so that's cool. And while Luffy's off exploring the island, we come to find out more information on kind of who this person that might be stealing shadows is, and we learn to find out it's actually a warlord of the sea, Gecko Moria, who's been stealing shadows from people and kind of trapping them and controlling them. And we also find out that Gecko Moria has a higher bounty than even Luffy has at this point in the show. Now these two things kind of mess with me. First thing, the shadow, because when Brook's talking about someone stealing his shadow, I was getting a little bit of flashbacks in my head to Blackbeard fighting Ace in the previous few episodes, because obviously Blackbeard's power has like some form of like darkness or something like that with it. So I actually thought we were getting something with Blackbeard or getting some sort of form built off of Blackbeard's powers. And so I was excited for Blackbeard, honestly, at this part of the show. So maybe that was a good fake out on their end to kind of tease me with the Blackbeard power and then kind of lead me in a different direction. Obviously, I'm sure there's more darkness related powers out there. I don't know. I was really hoping we'd get some more Blackbeard here. Obviously, he's not here, and that's fine. I don't need every arc or every saga to revolve around Blackbeard or anything like that. I just like the drop of him with Ace before kind of would perfectly lead into Blackbeard kind of being a character here, but I get it. It's fine. And obviously, my whole thing here is that we know Luffy's been able to take on all of the Marines basically, and can also take on a large portion of big threats so far with Water 7. So them saying that Gecko Moria is more powerful than Luffy, I don't know. At this point in the show, I was like, what? Like his power seems intense as far as controlling shadows, but it's definitely not like a physical power. You can't, I mean, I guess you can fight with it, but it doesn't lend to as much physical abilities as Luffy's does. So I don't know. I'd be interested to know how Gecko Moria's bounty got so high, other than like I guess doing experiments on people, but still. But either way, that's cool. We get the introduction to a new warlord, which is awesome. And then they kind of name drop this whole thing of the ship itself. Thriller Bark is actually a ship, that it's a whole island that's a ship. And in the previous Water 7 saga, they were mentioning that Iceberg wanted to turn that Water 7 base, he wants to basically turn into like a floating island, like a ship pretty much too. So I'm wondering if there's like some sort of collab potentially happening with that, because I don't know, I feel like islands being able to be used as ships has come up a few times, like a handful of times in the show, and I wonder if that's something we're going to get more of later on. And I will say after that, the stuff with Nami and this guy who I don't even remember his name, I just didn't care for. It was boring, it was annoying, the comedic moments fell flat for me. I just didn't find it funny, I didn't find it interesting. I just wasn't feeling this character or Nami's fight with this character at all. It just wasn't for me, and for that reason, I'm out. I'm out. I will say Nami saying she's actually a man, kind of funny. I did like that. That was funny to me. And the fight with Frankie and Robin with this huge spider definitely did leave me a little itchy, maybe. Definitely scared of spiders, so that was fun. We do get more information from Brook, just further explaining that Hogback basically brings the bodies together and fixes the actual physical damage, and that Moria's job is to basically steal someone's shadow and put someone's shadow in that empty vessel body, pretty much. And the shadows are said to hold their personality and combat style. Funny how it's the two things that are kind of essential. Now, on Moria's devil fruit power, I think it's interesting. and I think it is cool. But the issue is that he kind of needs Dr. Hogback, right? Like, they do show at the end he is able to have more of his own abilities without Dr. Hogback involved, but I feel like to really push his abilities to the limit and to kind of really get the full use of his devil fruit, he kind of needs to add his devil fruit powers onto something else, whether that means, you know, doing what Dr. Hogback is doing here by creating empty bodies or like whatever. I don't know, it just seems like his devil fruit is kind of not really fully baked. I don't know, it's fine, but it's just not the most amazing devil fruit we've been seeing, or, you know, even one of the cooler ones, honestly. And I do think them saying that the zombies and everything that he creates with the shadows being weak to salt is actually really smart. I think that does make sense, because obviously devil fruits are weak to like seawater, so salt being in seawater, that makes sense why that would kind of weaken the zombies themselves. But then that like whole thing kind of falls apart, because then it's like, then is every devil fruit user weak to salt? Like, if I throw salt at any devil fruit user, would that weaken their powers? It makes sense for Moria's powers here for sure, but then it kind of stops making sense for when you bring in everything else. So I don't really know what that's about. I would love further clarification if salt is like an instant killer to all devil fruit users, because that'd be kind of funny. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like Oda definitely drops things with specific reasons. So like, I'm sure Eneru being able to basically not fight Luffy at all, because Luffy's the exact opposite of him, I'm sure that'll come back in some way, in some form. I doubt Eneru is completely gone from the story. In the same way that I feel like this whole salt devil fruit thing, like, I don't know, they haven't really mentioned it that much and really talked about it, so I'm interested to know if this becomes something further than just this. So now, the part here when Luffy gets his shadow removed was honestly one of the best parts of this entire saga. I actually felt really bad for him here, especially because our crew, or at least a portion of our crew, is forced to basically watch. And at this point in the show, we really don't know if we can get Luffy's shadow back. We don't know if he's dead. We don't really fully know everything yet. So at this point, it actually is looking really bad for him. And I definitely did feel something there. And I definitely felt bad for our crew having to watch him go through that as well. Now, when this is happening, we do get a huge piece of One Piece lore. Now, Moria does mention that he has been beaten by someone before, that being someone from the New World named Kaido. Now, being on TikTok and being in the One Piece conversation, whether that's on YouTube or just in general, I've heard the name Kaido. I know Kaido's kind of a more current character, or was current, at least in the last few episodes or chapters or whatever. So I know he's a big character that is introduced way later on. And I know he gets kind of shown off mainly like in the 800s, sort of, right? And so for this saga to name drop someone that might not show up for another 400, 500 episodes is just crazy. Like, I honestly was like, what the fuck? And I had to rewind the TV, because I know that Kato's a more current character, so to see that be name dropped so early on in the show was just really crazy for me. And then seeing ores is cool. Like, don't get me wrong, huge monsters are always cool, unless you're like in the movie Cloverfield, then maybe big monsters aren't awesome. But I don't know, they bring ores out like it's this huge, like, jaw-dropping moment, and I just really didn't care that much. Like, it's a cool big monster, but in the world of One Piece, that's not really that interesting. I would have loved to have seen maybe a character from the past, or a character that we had met before, kind of find out that they actually died. Like, if this was one of the giants from that one, I forget what arc it is, but these giants here, if it was one of these giants that we actually found out that Moria went and killed and is now using their body, like, that would have been like,
whoa, like, what the heck, like, not this guy, right? Like,
I feel like they could have just maybe made it pay off a little bit more on who Ors actually was. I'm not mad at it. I like Ors as a character, and I think his design is actually pretty cool, so I'm not mad at it. I just think that there was an opportunity there to maybe tie something back, and they didn't. But we then proceed to have one of the best full circle moments in the entire show. We find out that Brook's crew was the crew that had promised to come back and see Laboon 50 years ago before. So that whale that we met in, I don't know if it's the Reverse Mountain arc, but that whale, I think his name is Laboon. I'm not 100% sure. That, remember, the whale was waiting for a crew to come back and that sort of thing, and that crew actually ends up being Brook's crew, and that was just like the fact that we're still connecting stuff to the Reverse Mountain arc is just crazy. Like, we're going back a good amount now to connect stuff that I never even thought was going to get mentioned again. I love it. It's awesome. Now, the rest of this portion here of the Straw Hats fighting ghosts and zombies, I thought it dragged. I honestly just didn't really care. I don't know, maybe it's just the fact that they're ghosts and zombies, so I know that they don't really have any real weight to the story. I don't know, I just really wasn't feeling this portion. It dragged for me, so I'm just gonna skip all these fights and everything. And Perona, her devil fruit's cool, but what is it really doing? I'm just gonna skip past all that and just kind of move on, because it just doesn't really matter. I will say Hogback's backstory with that Sindri character is really cool. It's not amazing or again jaw-dropping, but I do like that they're tying that back and kind of giving some explanation as to, you know, who she is, who he was, and kind of how that came about. I like backstory. I like good backstory, and we got that, so that's cool. We also get the huge introduction to Kuma here, and when I say this dude got an introduction, this dude had an introduction. Like before he actually had showed up, I was watching this while I was like cleaning and putting stuff away, and when he pulled up, I paused the TV, finished what I was doing, and sat down to fully watch it because he just escalated everything to a completely different level when he comes into the show. And I find it really interesting because he's supposed to be a warlord too, right? But he doesn't have a crew. At least they don't show him with a crew or a boat or anything. So it's like, how are you a warlord without a crew? Like, I'm not saying that that's not possible. Obviously it totally could be, I guess, but isn't that the whole point, is that you're a warlord because you have so much power with your crew and everything? So I would like some explanation on that maybe. And there's a little bit of language here. Obviously I watched a little bit of dub and sub, but the dub version I watched of this mentions that when Perone is like seeing him, she says that when he was a pirate, he was the most brutal and tyrant person, basically, right? She uses like the past tense to refer to him as, when she's saying that he was really brutal when he was a pirate. She says that. And so in my head I'm like, why is she saying was a pirate? Like, isn't a warlord still technically a pirate, right? I'm not fully sure. I feel like that language should mean something, especially because it was very specific. So I don't know, maybe that means more than I'm leading on to mean. I don't know. And when he swipes Perona out of existence, I'm not sure what happens to her, if she's like disintegrated, sent to a different dimension or something like that. But it's just crazy because the level of just like jaw dropping that he had was insane here. I feel like that like him being introduced here really stepped everything up a whole different level, because we have him now, a warlord, with Gecko Moria, another warlord, while Luffy doesn't have his shadow, so he's kind of in a down state right now. It's just looking really bad for the Straw Hats here, and I don't know, it just was really interesting seeing him pull up and just kind of elevate things, and it kind of just shows how much one character can really change in a whole saga. And when Kuma shows up, I have so many questions. Like, one, why is he here? Two, like, what powers does he really even have? Like, he has a paw print and like ears that are like animals, but then he has like instant teleportation when he swipes. I'm not sure like what's going on with that. What does he want with Moria? He does bring up Luffy's brother or his dad at some point. He name drops Luffy's family. He does mention Ace once when he shows up, which is also kind of like, what does he want with Ace? Why is he talking about Luffy's brother here? Then when Kuma finally reaches Moria and then lets him know that Blackbeard will be replacing Crocodile as one of the warlords, it's just like, that's crazy, because as far as we know, Blackbeard has maybe been like 6, maybe 10 episodes at max. He's really played the most subtle, most like irrelevant role so far in the show. And so for him to be making all these big play moves and doing all these huge things in the background is crazy. And it's crazy because he's doing all these things while Luffy's doing his own thing. And he was only able to become a warlord because Luffy had taken out Crocodile. Like, all the things that Luffy's doing, Blackbeard's kind of taking those and rebounding them and doing even crazier shit with those things that Luffy's kind of leaving. So it's just wild, because that means that technically a Blackbeard would be working with the Marines in this instance. So I'm super interested to see where that goes. And I will say, I don't mind Nightmare Luffy at all. He gets his shadow removed, so he does kind of need to power up to really stay in there and fight the rest of this saga pretty much. And I will say, I really like the team all fighting against Oars. I love when our team comes together and just really works as a crew. I really liked watching that. That was really cool. But eventually Oars does overpower them, and then Luffy does pull up. And then Luffy does kind of do his own thing, but we do need the team and Luffy to come together to really overpower Oars and to take him down. And seeing them all kind of combo off of each other was really sick. I love seeing them do these crazy moves that we hadn't seen before and then explode off of that. So that was really cool. Eventually they do end up defeating Oars, and then Gecko Moria kind of comes out of his, little Oars suit, I guess, to fight them one-on-one. And Moria gets destroyed pretty quickly here. He doesn't, like I said, he can't really hold his own against Luffy. I just don't see how he would. So he gets dispatched pretty quickly. But then Kuma pretty much shows up and presses Control Z on them winning this fight, and pretty much says that he has to eliminate everyone on the orders of the world government. And I honestly didn't expect our crew to get like a new game plus mode fight after they just went through all that stuff. Like, they're pretty much dead at this point. I don't really see how they would have been able to take on another warlord after that. But like, at still this point, I'm confused as to what Kuma's powers are. Like, he has a little paw print thing going on. Cool, fine, makes sense, okay, whatever. But then he's like controlling air and like controlling energy. I don't really know how to explain it. Like, it just seems so, it doesn't make sense with what his devil power actually is. So I would like to see some further clarification on that eventually. What is interesting here is that Kuma basically says that if the crew surrenders Luffy to the government, that the crew will be spared. That doesn't make so much sense, because we all know Roger was executed, but even though he was executed, they still hunted everyone in his team. The shipwright, Frankie's mentor, we obviously saw, was executed as well for his crimes that he did with Roger. So for them to accept just Luffy but not really give a fuck about the crew definitely means that it's something personal that the government has issue with Luffy. And so basically Kuma does a crazy blast, knocks everyone out except for Zoro. Zoro's the only one that kind of maintains some sort of, is still awake after that. And this is honestly hands down the best Zoro moment in the entire show. Not even a question, this is his best moment for sure. Like, I think what Zoro does here and the flag being shot down in Water 7 are up there with my 2 favorite moments so far in the show. And the way Zoro's willing to fully give up himself and his life for Luffy and his crew and his captain is just, it's just so like, wow, like the emotions were really high at this point in the show. And it makes me think back to when Zoro wanted and demanded that Usopp apologize to Luffy for disrespecting him as, the captain. I think Zoro generally truly admires and respects Luffy to a really high level. And it's even more crazy because Sanji eventually does get up and also kind of offers the same thing, take me instead of Luffy, dish out whatever you're gonna dish out on him, give that to me instead. And Zoro eventually does end up knocking Sanji out, so Sanji kind of gets taken down anyways. But then Zoro basically says, whatever damage you're gonna inflict on Luffy, inflict on me instead. He's gone through too much. He will for sure die if you damage him further. Take me instead. So Kuma agrees and pretty much goes crazy on Zoro. We don't actually see what happens, but we do see the aftermath of Zoro afterwards. And when everyone wakes up, we see Zoro just dripping and drenched, dripping.
Hold on, B. Hold on, yeah. Look at the fucking drip. Yeah.
He's looking nice. But anyways, dripping and drenched with blood and just completely like frozen like a statue. It's honestly really crazy. And like I said, emotions were high at this point. I was worried for our character Zoro. And the most wild part here is that Zoro doesn't explain anything. He doesn't want credit. He doesn't want to get a higher position in the team. He doesn't want any sort of acknowledgement over what he just did. What he just did was purely out of his own willingness to save Luffy and save the team. That's crazy. He's like the most selfless character so far we've seen as far as what they're willing to do for the team. But honestly, I really liked Usopp a lot in Water 7, but I feel like after this, I love Zoro's character, and I'm really excited to see where he goes from past this. And that kind of closes out the general portion of this arc. We do get kind of some aftermath after all that. Here we do find that Moria and Hogback did escape together. We also do find a newspaper basically showing us that Ace did survive the fight with Blackbeard, but is currently being held at prison at Impel Down. We also do have a moment of Lola giving Nami her Viva card and basically letting her know to look for her mom who's in the new world. So that could be crazy. I feel like whenever anyone mentions anything about the new world, it just like catches my ear. I really got to pay attention to when they're mentioning that. So whoever Lola's mom is probably going to be a huge character later on. We didn't get the big setup for what I think is going to be Ace's big part of the story here. We get his card burning up, indicating that his life source or like him as a person is in some form of danger, right? And again, it seems out of character for Luffy just to dismiss this. Like, he sees that Ace, his big brother, who is told to be this most, super powerful guy, right, is in danger and is being held in prison. You think he'd maybe show some sort of compassion or want to do something, but he dismisses it. And I don't think that's in character with what Luffy would really do. But either way, our story comes to a close there. We got these huge monsters with big eyes at the end. I'm really excited to see what those end up being. I have not looked up anything, so those might already be known what they are, or they might not be yet, but I'm really excited to find out what those big monsters with those huge eyes are at the end of the show here, or the end of the saga. Overall, I really like the saga. I still think it has some problems, and I do think it kind of drags a little bit. I think it's better than Skypiea, but I don't think it's as good as Water 7, but I am excited to move forward here and get even further in One Piece. So subscribe and stay tuned for my review on the next portion here. We got Marineford coming up, so hopefully that gets crazy. Subscribe and like the video, and thanks for watching to the end.